So when I was a little kid, my favorite movie was Pixar's The Incredibles. And I actually liked it so much that I dressed up as the Sun Is It for Halloween. Now, this was part of an ongoing obsession that I had with superheroes for my whole childhood, and that countless other kids had. But where those other kids matured and developed better interests, I still love superheroes, and I still think they're great. So I want to talk about superheroes today. And I'm specifically going to be talking about how we can use superheroes to look at how our societal views have changed since their introduction. Now, my first superhero obsession was Superman. Now, Superman is a pretty basic choice, but this was mostly based on the fact that this was my first superhero shirt. And Superman, for those of you who don't know, is an alien from the planet Krypton. And due to his alien physiology, he gains extraordinary powers on Earth. Now, these powers have grown and shifted a lot over the years, but when he was first introduced, he only had 3. He had invincibility, super speed, and the ability to, and I quote, jump tall buildings in a single bound. Now, that's basically a fancier, cooler way of saying jump really high and really far. They were a little bit less creative back then. Now, Superman was introduced in June 1938 and was popularized through his use as propaganda during the Second World War. Superman perfectly represents the golden age of comics, which was when comics were first introduced. This is because Superman is widely recognized as the first introduced comic book superhero. Now, superheroes back then were perfect. They had no problems. Well, other than saving the world. They would only focus on saving the world in every issue, and that was it. They didn't deal with any human struggles because they were often not human. They were aliens or robots. Now, it's the 40s. We have just exited the Great Depression, and we're going into World War II. The world is kind of a bad place. We're really stressed, and everything kind of sucks. So what do we look for? We look for superheroes. Superheroes are perfect for us. They represent an escape from all of our human problems. They don't deal with any of those. They just save the world, and they do it effortlessly, which makes us feel better about our lives. So superheroes from the Golden Age were perfect. Now, my next superhero obsession was Spider-Man. Spider-Man, for those of you who don't know, is actually just a regular high schooler named Peter Parker. And Spider-Man has always been one of my favorites because Spider-Man is just a high school nerd that gains superpowers. And I don't know if you can tell from my TED Talk as a 17-year-old about superheroes, but I can kind of relate to being a little bit of a nerdy kid. So the idea that there was a superhero out there who was also a nerd was really cool to me. Now, Spider-Man has the abilities of a spider, or more specifically, powers based on a spider. He didn't grow like 6 extra eyes or legs when he got bitten. And Spider-Man was the perfect representation of the Bronze Age of comics. He was introduced, and he was supposed to be a darker character, and that was what these comic books started to introduce. Darker characters that started to deal with human problems that everyone had to deal with. These characters dealt with getting bullied, getting injured, or breaking up with their girlfriend. They were like me and you. They struggled with all of that, and they would also save the world. But now comic books were divided. They would talk half about saving the world and half about these superheroes. Now it's the 70s. Characters have become a lot more developed. And this is because right now we're dealing with a lot more struggle. There's a lot less clear ideas of good and evil and black and white. Because of world events like the Vietnam War, people started to realize there was ambiguity and conflict. There wasn't necessarily always a good side and a bad side. There was some sort of gray area. And that's where our superheroes started to exist, towards this gray area. They were still great heroes, but they also had to deal with all of our struggles. They were super not just because they had powers, but because they were like me and you and had powers. Now, finally, my most recent superhero interest is something that probably you've all heard of, and it's an Amazon Prime show called The Boys. Now, The Boys, in case you don't know, the premise of it is it takes all of our well-known heroes that we know and love, like Superman and Spider-Man, and it creates almost parodies of them that are evil and selfish. These new heroes are corrupt, and they're almost more like celebrities than they are heroes. They'll save someone, but they'll do it for the publicity stunt, not for saving that person's life. The perfect representation of this is the show's main villain, Homelander. He's the evil version of Superman, and throughout the show, he is constantly corrupt and evil and does whatever he feels is necessary to get what he wants because he thinks that because of his power, he's superior to everyone else and it doesn't matter. The protagonists of this show are actually the normal people. They're just everyday people without powers that want to expose these corrupt villains for who they are. And to do so, they go to very extreme lengths, often blurring the lines of heroism themselves. The Boys is a very good representation of the modern age of comics. Now, this so creatively named age doubles down on the darker themes of the Bronze Age. Instead of having our heroes just be flawed, they're often even worse than normal people. And to go on top of that, they often don't have powers now. They're just regular people that rely on a special set of skills or technology to get what they want done. And the villains are the opposite. They're more and more superpowered villains who often have the advantage over heroes. And they have much more complex ideologies than simply, I'm evil and I want money. They focus on other stuff, and we can often relate with the villains just as much as with the heroes in comics. Now, this all represents a cultural shift towards more skepticism in traditional power structures and institutions. We can see this from global events, like people doubting health measures from their governments during a global pandemic, or not trusting very specific instructions about an election that they have been proven that was correct, and yet they still doubt it. All of that shows that we don't trust governments as much. And comic books have picked up on this. They've started giving the villains power, or turning those who are good with power into villains. This vilification of power has gone across all comic books. Now, what does this say about us as a society? Are we just starting to lose faith in the idea of a hero? Personally, I don't think so. I mean, sure, a hero has to go through a lot more to get their job done and save the day. And it's not as effortless as Superman coming in and saving a train without breaking a sweat. But they still win almost every issue. And I think that's what's important. Sure, part of this might be because, let's face it, if the comic books killed off all of our favorites, we wouldn't really be interested anymore. We wouldn't pay attention. Imagine if a fictional universe killed off all of its fan-favorite characters. That'd be like if the Star Wars sequels replaced Han, Luke, and Leia with some blander, less charismatic copies. That would suck, right? Now, personally, I believe that this shift just represents us getting more realistic with our heroes. We no longer expect them to be perfect, godlike figures that swoop in and save the day, and we want them to be more like us. And that's because we've started to realize that the actual heroes are real people. They're not godlike figures, and realistically, they live everyday lives and deal with everyday problems. But they're still super because they still focus on making the world a better place. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe all of our heroes started getting much worse when they started wearing their underwear on the inside of their costumes. Thank you so much for listening.